What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was about to be shattered? Tonight, we take you deep inside a story no one saw coming. A scandal so explosive it threatens not only Meghan's public image, but the very foundation of the British monarchy. This is not just a tabloid headline or a royal family squabble gone public. This is a courtroom saga, a family betrayal, and a calculated blackmail plot that has stunned even Meghan's most loyal supporters. And at the center of it all, her own father, Thomas Markle, the man she once called Daddy, now the man who handed her over to justice. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's sentence became final, goodbye forever. Let's begin where all great downfalls begin, with ambition. When Meghan first entered the royal family, she was seen by many as a breath of fresh air. An American actress, a humanitarian, a woman of color stepping into one of the world's oldest institutions. The media lapped it up, the public adored the fairy tale, and even the royal family seemed cautiously optimistic. But under the surface, tensions brewed. There were whispers of conflict, control, and complaints from palace staff. Rumors began to leak. Was Meghan really the modernizing force she claimed to be, or was she something far more calculating? For months, the royal watchers dismissed the noise as tabloid fodder. After all, wasn't Meghan a victim of relentless press harassment? Wasn't she just defending herself against a cold, out-of-touch institution? That's what the public thought, until Thomas Markle came forward. Thomas, an aging man living a quiet life in Mexico, had been painted as the villain in Meghan's rise. He gave clumsy interviews, leaked private letters, and was portrayed as the embarrassing father desperate for attention. But what the world didn't know was that Thomas was collecting receipts, not for fame, not for revenge, but, as he would later claim, for the truth. The truth, as it turned out, was a Pandora's box. What did Thomas have? At first, even the palace didn't know. But slowly, piece by piece, a horrifying picture emerged. Audio recordings, written messages, voicemails, all pointing to one damning accusation. Meghan Markle had orchestrated a blackmail plot against the royals. She had allegedly threatened to expose their deepest secrets, affairs, financial scandals, medical records, unless she received substantial financial payouts. This wasn't a gossip piece. This was a criminal case. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine being in Thomas Markle's shoes. You're a father watching your daughter live a life you never imagined. She's a duchess, a global icon, someone invited to stand next to the queen herself. And yet, behind the scenes, you're reading messages from her that make your blood run cold. Messages where she coldly calculates what would happen if certain stories were accidentally leaked. Recordings where she laughs at how easily the family could be manipulated. What would you do? Thomas claims he wrestled with this question for months. He didn't want to hurt Meghan, not really. But the more he watched the fallout between Meghan and the royal family, the more he saw Harry spiraling in the press, the more he felt he had no choice. And when he approached palace aides with his evidence, he expected to be dismissed. Instead, they invited him in. The royal family, we must remember, has survived centuries of scandal. But blackmail from the inside, this was unprecedented. At this point, the public knew nothing. Harry and Meghan were still living their Montecito dream, or at least pretending to. Instagram posts of chickens, podcasts about mental health, Netflix deals, Spotify contracts. But behind the scenes, a legal storm was brewing. The palace had quietly handed over the evidence to authorities, and investigations had begun. Why did it take so long for the story to break? Insiders say the palace wanted to avoid public spectacle. They hoped Meghan would quietly negotiate, step back, perhaps return funds, issue a private apology. But Meghan, according to sources, was defiant. She believed she was untouchable, and why wouldn't she? For years, she had controlled the narrative. She was the wronged woman, the survivor, the one speaking truth to power. But in this case, the evidence spoke louder. When the indictment came, it was a bombshell. The press erupted. Headlines screamed, "Duchess accused of blackmail. Thomas Markle hands over explosive evidence. Meghan faces criminal charges." The public was split. Some said it was a witch hunt. Others said it was justice long overdue. But no one, absolutely no one, expected the charges to stick. Meghan's lawyers were some of the best in the world. She had money, connections, a platform, and millions of supporters. And yet, as the case unfolded, the evidence was damning. Audio clips where Meghan explicitly threatened to go nuclear if payments weren't made. Messages where she calculated press leaks down to the hour. Witnesses who testified to meetings, to plans, to strategies. And watching from the front row? Thomas Markle. In a quiet courtroom, the man Meghan once called the biggest embarrassment of my life sat silently, holding the papers that would seal her fate. His face, described by reporters, was a mix of sorrow and resolve. When asked why he came forward, Thomas reportedly said, "Because no one is above the law, not even my daughter." The emotional fallout was enormous. Harry, sources say, was devastated. Torn between his love for Meghan and his loyalty to the crown, he withdrew from public life during the trial. The royal family maintained a stony silence. No official statements, no leaks, just cold, calculated distance. Meanwhile, Meghan, once a master of the media, found herself isolated. Friends distanced themselves. Former allies went silent. The very platforms that had celebrated her transformation into royalty now covered her downfall with glee. But let's stop and ask, how did we get here? How did a woman who captivated the world end up in a courtroom, facing the possibility of prison? How did a father-daughter bond become the fuse that blew up a royal marriage, a global image, and a carefully curated fairy tale? This is the story we're about to explore. Over the next chapters, we will take you through the rise and fall of Meghan Markle. We will dissect the evidence, the courtroom drama, the family betrayals, and the final, devastating sentence. We will hear from experts, insiders, and those who knew Meghan before the fame. We will ask the hard questions. Was Meghan always this calculated, or was she pushed to the edge? Did Thomas do the right thing, or did he betray his own blood? And most importantly, what happens to Harry now? By the end of this journey, you will have seen a side of the royal saga that no headline can capture. You will understand the human costs, the emotional wreckage, and the chilling reality of what happens when ambition, love, power, and betrayal collide. So buckle in. This is not just a story, it's a reckoning. You don't begin a scandal by throwing stones. You begin with a whisper. A seemingly harmless comment in a boardroom, a slight shift in tone at a banquet. Things that seem insignificant at first but, over time, add up to something explosive. That's exactly how the Meghan Markle story began. Softly, under the radar, before the world ever realized how much tension was simmering beneath the surface. When Meghan and Harry officially stepped away from royal duties in early 2020, many believed this marked the end of royal conflict. The Duchess, radiant in a pale pink trench coat at the departure celebration, seemed liberated. No more strict protocols, no endless head-turning at public engagements, and no hushed gossip within palace walls. Instead, there were cozy Montecito mornings, interviews with Oprah, and bold Netflix deals. The narrative was clear. Meghan had traded royal constraint for creative freedom and purpose. But beneath the picture-perfect Instagram posts were signs of a deeper fracture. It began with small things. Staff whispers about unrealistic expectations. A stylist recalling an upset over the shade of blue chosen for official portraits. A royal correspondent voicing confusion over delays in scheduling charity events. These were the dots that only made sense when connected. The palace, long accustomed to handling internal tension, had lived through far worse: infidelity, feuds, financial mismanagement. Yet even the most veteran courtiers reportedly spoke privately that something felt different this time. The tension emanated not from tradition, but from power. Meghan, at 38, had come to the palace with a clearly articulated sense of mission. She wanted to modernize the monarchy. She wanted to speak up about mental health, shine a light on overlooked charities, and show that the royals could evolve with the times. For a moment, it seemed to work. The invincible facade of the crown appeared frayed, yes, but also flexible. She was invited to sit beside the Queen and heard voices cheering for her new direction. On the surface, the Duchess of Sussex was living the dream. There were red carpet appearances alongside Harry, joint appearances for youth empowerment initiatives, and high-profile global campaigns. There were laughter-filled moments during diplomatic visits and heartfelt speeches that turned heads. And then, there were the royal protocol scandals. She refused to curtsy at private events, She wore sleeveless dresses where no sleeves had gone before. She ignored tradition in minor, yet culturally explosive ways. Some in royal circles shrugged it off. Every new royal partner upset the status quo. Eventually, tradition wins out. And Meghan, the critics argued, had too much ambition too fast. She wasn't just stepping on toes, she was rewriting the songbook. After a point, the whispers turned into side glances at banquet tables, eyes rolled in corners of palace corridors, notes passed in hushed tones from the hallways. Meghan's bond with the press, another flashpoint. Within weeks of joining the family, she was walking on eggshells. A wrong photo angle, a compliment phrased incorrectly. She responded by distancing from certain outlets. The Guardian friendly, the Daily Mail blocked. "I have to protect my mental health," she would later say, citing early battles with the tabloid press. And indeed, her statement resonated with millions. After all, who could blame her? Yet in palace offices, some saw more than self-protection. Accusations emerged, on anonymous royal blogs at first, but they gained traction. Meghan wasn't just protective, she was controlling. Stories circulated of aides being fired after writing optimistic press releases about charities she supported. Others claimed she demanded the wording of speeches she distrusted. A particularly vivid anecdote described a prep meeting where Meghan allegedly vetoed a royal bride's speech style because it didn't feel authentic. But until now, these were only rumors, small sparks in the forest. They didn't set off alarms. Not when set against the story of a star-crossed American who became a royal bride. And so, the world continued watching the couple through the lens of their Instagram account. A home with chickens, a charity outreach to veterans, a Christmas card featuring the royal residences behind them. It looked wholesome. It looked genuine. It looked normal. Yet looking back now, these glimpses were carefully filtered. Behind the scenes, an information management strategy was in play. Press-friendly snippets were released, often corroborated by hand-picked friendly outlets. Meanwhile, the palace felt like it was standing in mud. Each statement tentatively phrased to reassure, yet never fully flat. There was no real resonance, no official support statement, no active counter-narrative offered in those early days. Just a quiet withdrawal, a cautious repositioning, and then silence. When rumors circulated that Meghan herself had personally approved narrative points for her relationship with the royal firm, the initial reaction was dismissive. Of course, she cared about how she was portrayed. But as months passed, a counter-narrative took hold behind palace walls. This wasn't just image control, it was strategic storytelling. And in closed-door meetings, the question was whispered. Who actually pulled the strings? What would have happened if those whispers had remained private? What if palace aides dealt with them through internal communication or tradition-driven, quiet diplomacy? Chances are, this whole saga might have taken a different, less public path. Then again, other elements had already changed the rules. Meghan's vast fortune, her American legal rights, Harry's celebrity momentum, the couple's global sponsorship deals. By the time Thomas Markle began to pay attention again, not as a supportive father, but as a concerned former father-in-law, the stage was already set. Because if you look back at Harry's public interviews from 2022 onward, you begin to discern a sharper tension in his eyes, a note of defensiveness in his voice. He clung to protective ideals, but occasionally slipped into liabilities. He spoke about generational trauma, the lack of institutional empathy, the need for service above all. Admirable as they sounded, the royal institution perceived them as pressure for transformation on their terms. Then came the audio messages. Harmless? Perhaps. Yet taken together, they painted a chilling portrait. A duchess who calculated risk like an executive, a strategist ready to articulate leverage. And once Thomas confronted his daughter, those collected tapes became not just recordings, but ammunition. It was at this point that the calm truly ended. Not with a scream, but with a guarded phone call, a remark over tea. The palace noticed. Legal teams picked up transferable damages tags. And yes, the world would eventually learn all about it. But in this chapter, in this moment, the storm was brewing quietly and precisely. What do we take from this? That ambition alone isn't dangerous, it's fuel. That image control isn't deception, it's power. And that a family feud, in the end, is a war zone when fame, money, and titles are at stake. As we move forward to the next chapter, We'll look back at Thomas, once distant, now central, and discover why a frustrated father decided to gather evidence that would rewrite history. Thomas Markle was never meant to be a central figure in royal history. When Meghan ascended into global fame, he should have faded quietly into the background, a footnote, an afterthought. And yet, there he was, sitting in the eye of a storm he neither sought nor understood, until, slowly, he became convinced that speaking out was no longer just an option but a necessity. For years, Thomas Markle lived a quiet life in Rosarito, Mexico. His days were simple. Tending to his modest garden, reading old newspapers, sipping coffee on his porch while overlooking the Pacific. To his neighbors, he was friendly but reserved, a man of habit, occasionally seen carrying groceries or chatting about mundane things like the weather. But behind this simple facade, Thomas nursed a deep wound. His relationship with Meghan had deteriorated to almost complete silence. No birthday cards, no holiday visits, not even a simple phone call. And it hurt. In the media, Thomas was cast as the embarrassing father, bumbling, needy, unreliable. His staged paparazzi photos before the royal wedding were used as proof of his desperation for attention. He gave awkward interviews, sometimes contradicting himself, sometimes appearing bewildered by his own daughter's rapid ascent into royalty. Critics scoffed at him. Supporters of Meghan dismissed him as irrelevant. And yet, Thomas watched everything closely. Every news report, every interview, every time his name was mentioned. He listened, he took notes, and, most importantly, he saved things. According to those close to him, the turning point came not from the tabloids, but from Meghan's own words. Private communications between father and daughter revealed a side of Meghan that the public had never seen, a cold, calculating side. There were messages that hinted at her frustration with palace staff, remarks about controlling the narrative, comments about leverage and timing. Individually, none of this was shocking. Taken together, however, they painted a different picture. Thomas initially dismissed his concerns. Maybe she was just venting, maybe she was under pressure. But as time passed, the tone hardened. The messages grew darker. There were casual references to private information about senior royals, hints that she might leak certain stories if things didn't go her way, discussions about finances that felt transactional rather than familial. It wasn't just a daughter confiding in her father anymore. It was a strategist outlining a playbook. For months, Thomas kept silent. He felt conflicted, torn between loyalty to his daughter and his growing unease at what he was witnessing. But then, something happened that pushed him over the edge. Meghan stopped communicating altogether. No explanations, no farewell, just silence. And then, rumors surfaced in the press that Thomas Markle was a problem, that he couldn't be trusted, that he was unreliable and unstable. To Thomas, this was the final straw. In interviews after the scandal broke, Thomas admitted that it was this portrayal, this rewriting of his character, that made him act. She didn't just walk away, he reportedly said to a confidant. She erased me. She wanted the world to believe I was dangerous, untrustworthy, that I was irrelevant. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. This decision didn't come lightly. Thomas agonized over it for weeks. He contacted lawyers, not for advice on publicity, but for advice on legality. What did it mean to possess private recordings and messages? Could he submit them to authorities? Would he be prosecuted for leaking confidential information? The answers were complicated, but ultimately clear. If the material contained evidence of a crime, especially one as serious as blackmail, then handing it over wasn't just permissible, it was required. The process began quietly. A discreet meeting with palace advisors. Long interviews with attorneys and investigators. Weeks of gathering and organizing the material. Some of the recordings were scratchy and old, voicemails left late at night, messages recorded almost by accident. Others were pristine, crystal-clear text conversations saved from Meghan's own emails, meticulously archived by Thomas. The material was devastating, not because of its volume, but because of its clarity. There were direct statements from Meghan threatening to reveal damaging information about certain royals unless financial arrangements were made. Specific figures were discussed. Timelines were outlined. If they don't give me what's due, I'll make sure the press hears everything, one message allegedly read. Another contained veiled threats about private medical records. These weren't idle threats. They were structured, deliberate, chilling in their precision. The palace's reaction was swift but quiet. Internally, senior advisors convened emergency meetings. Legal counsel was brought in immediately. The matter was escalated beyond the palace gates to law enforcement officials. For the first time in modern history, the royal family faced the possibility that one of their own, by marriage or not, had engaged in criminal behavior against them. Throughout this entire process, Thomas remained mostly in the shadows. He gave no interviews, made no public statements, and refused to speak to the tabloids that had once courted him relentlessly. Neighbors noticed a change. He became even more withdrawn, rarely venturing out, no longer sitting on his porch. It was as if the weight of what he was about to do, expose his own daughter, was too heavy to carry publicly. But make no mistake, Thomas Markle's decision to turn over this material was no accident of timing or impulse. It was calculated, deliberate, and, in his mind, justified. He saw himself not as a betrayer, but as a reluctant whistleblower, a man who believed he was protecting a greater institution, even at the cost of losing his daughter forever. His actions sparked fierce debate. Some condemned him outright. How could a father betray his own child? They asked. What kind of parent does that, regardless of circumstances? Others argued that Thomas was doing what any responsible citizen should do, report wrongdoing, even if it came from within his own family. Public opinion polls were divided almost evenly, with many unsure how to feel. Was this an act of courage or of cowardice? Of justice or of revenge? Through it all, Thomas stayed silent, until the trial began. Then, and only then, did he break his silence in carefully prepared statements, read by his attorneys. I did not want this, he said in one statement. But I could not stay quiet while serious harm was being done. Behind closed doors, insiders say that Thomas wept after handing over the evidence. Not because he doubted what he had done, but because he knew that there would be no coming back from this moment. Whatever relationship he had left with Meghan was now completely, irrevocably severed. In court, Thomas would become a pivotal witness. His testimony, though restrained and factual, carried emotional weight. He was, after all, the father of the accused. His voice cracked at key moments as he recounted conversations and exchanges. Jurors reportedly watched him closely, noting his body language, the emotion in his face. Some described him as broken but resolute, others as conflicted and deeply sad. And it was Thomas's testimony that anchored the prosecution's case. Without him, the recordings and messages would have seemed abstract, distant. With him, they became personal, immediate, devastating. He painted a picture not of a vengeful duchess, but of a cold strategist willing to use whatever tools she had to achieve her goals, even at the expense of those closest to her. By the time Thomas left the witness stand, reporters noted that even Meghan seemed shaken. Throughout most of the trial, she had remained composed, occasionally taking notes, occasionally whispering to her attorneys. But as her father testified, her mask slipped. At moments, she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. At others, she stared directly at him, her face unreadable but tense. In interviews after the trial, friends of Thomas said that he would never recover from this experience. He did what he believed was right, one friend said. But at what cost? He's lost his daughter forever. There's no reunion after this. No reconciliation. Just silence. And so, Thomas Markle's breaking point became a turning point in royal history. His decision to act, to hand over the material he had gathered, to testify against his own flesh and blood, set in motion events that would ultimately lead to Meghan's conviction. He did not do it for fame, for money, or for revenge. He did it, as he said, because the truth matters, even when it costs you everything. The courtroom was packed, but silent. Every camera in the world seemed trained on this moment, the moment when the evidence would finally be laid bare. For weeks, speculation had run rampant. What exactly had Thomas Markle handed over? What kind of proof could possibly turn public sympathy away from Meghan Markle, once the poster child of modern royal progress, to a defendant facing criminal charges? The prosecution's lead counsel rose deliberately, holding up a simple file folder. It didn't look like much. No grandiose show of boxes or piles of documents. But inside that folder were documents and recordings that would send shockwaves not just through the courtroom, but around the world. It began with the transcripts. The prosecution read them slowly, almost clinically. They were transcripts of text messages and voice notes that Meghan had allegedly sent over a period of 18 months, a period during which she and Harry were engaged in fierce negotiations with the royal family about their future roles, financial arrangements, and public obligations. The words, when read aloud, chilled the room. If they think they can keep me quiet, they're wrong. They owe me. And if they don't pay up, everything goes to the press. I know things they don't want out. I can destroy them. All of them. In another message, timing is key. If they want peace, they need to understand who holds the cards here. And another still, less direct, but unmistakable in tone. It's funny how much they rely on silence. I wonder what happens if that silence is broken. These weren't just idle threats, the prosecution argued. They were part of a pattern, a deliberate campaign to exert pressure on senior royals for financial compensation and other privileges. But the transcripts alone, while damaging, might not have been enough to seal a conviction. After all, words can be misinterpreted. Context can be debated. Tone can be disputed. That's why the audio recordings mattered so much. Thomas Markle had kept voicemails from Meghan, voicemails that the world never expected to hear. And as they played in open court, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. In one recording, Meghan's voice was calm, almost casual, but what she said sent chills down spines. They think they can cut us off financially and walk away? Please. I know about their deals, their secrets, the affairs, the hidden payments. All of it. If they think they can just disappear from our lives, and we'll keep quiet, they're delusional. The recording paused, then continued. I've got enough to bury them. I just need to decide when. For the first time in public, Meghan's own voice seemed to confirm what had until then been speculation. Her words painted a picture not of a misunderstood duchess, but of someone fully aware of the power she held, and fully prepared to use it. The prosecution then introduced corroborating evidence. Emails between Meghan and an unnamed confidant, in which she appeared to outline possible scenarios for media pressure, including estimated financial outcomes if particular stories were leaked. I'm just saying. If one of those stories broke, they'd fold fast. We both know it. It's not about the money exactly. It's about leverage. Control. And control was the theme that emerged again and again. In one email, Meghan allegedly discussed how to time leaks to maximize media coverage while minimizing blowback. We can stagger the stories, she reportedly wrote. Give them time to panic between each one. Let them feel cornered. By the time they think they're catching their breath, we hit them again. But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was a series of voice memos Meghan had left. Memos that suggested premeditation, planning, and cold strategy. In one, her voice was almost breezy. This isn't about hurting anyone. This is about protecting our future. We deserve what we deserve, and if they don't understand that yet, they will soon enough. Throughout these revelations, the camera's gaze frequently landed on Meghan's face. Her expression, once impassive, hardened as the evidence mounted. Occasionally she scribbled notes to her legal team, but mostly she sat still, her jaw tense, her gaze fixed straight ahead. For the prosecution, the cumulative effect of these recordings and messages was devastating. It allowed them to paint a portrait of Meghan as someone who had not only contemplated but executed a plan to pressure the royal family into financial arrangements under threat of public exposure. It was no longer about gossip or misunderstandings. This was, as the prosecution bluntly stated, a clear case of blackmail, calculated, deliberate, and sustained. Observers in the courtroom noted that even Meghan's most ardent supporters seemed shaken. Journalists who had long defended her began to shift tone in their reporting, focusing less on her status as a target of racism or misogyny, and more on the specific, undeniable words she had used. Social media reflected this shift almost immediately. Hashtags that had once celebrated Meghan's independence and courage now trended with far darker commentary. Debates raged online about ethics, privacy, and justice. Was this all taken out of context? Was Thomas Markle exaggerating or fabricating? Or was this, at last, the real story behind the facade? Further evidence supported the prosecution's case. Financial records were presented showing unexplained transfers of funds from entities connected to the royal household to shell companies with ties to Meghan's advisors. While not directly proving that money had changed hands in response to threats, they added an ominous backdrop to the text messages and recordings. In one particularly damning moment, the prosecution introduced excerpts from Meghan's private calendar, which appeared to show planned meetings with tabloid editors, at times coinciding with critical negotiations between the Sussexes and the palace. This wasn't random, the prosecution argued. This was deliberate orchestration. The calendar, the communications, the financial records, all pointed to a coordinated effort to pressure, threaten, and extract. As the evidence unfolded, legal experts watching the trial began to comment publicly that the case was stronger than anyone had anticipated. What we're seeing here isn't just hearsay or a family squabble gone wrong, one legal analyst noted on national television. This is well-documented, corroborated, damning evidence of a sustained pattern of coercion. Inside the courtroom, however, the atmosphere remained tense but orderly. The judge carefully instructed the jury to weigh the evidence impartially, reminding them that media coverage should play no role in their deliberations. But even with those cautions, it was clear the prosecution had laid out a devastating case. Throughout this section of the trial, Harry remained absent from the courtroom. His absence spoke volumes. Sources close to the palace suggested he was torn between private loyalty and public shame, a man caught in a tragedy not of his own making, but one that consumed him nonetheless. For Thomas Markle, sitting quietly behind the prosecution's table, the presentation of this evidence was both vindication and agony. He did not react as each message was read aloud. He did not look at Meghan. He simply sat still, occasionally rubbing his hands together, eyes cast downward. After the day's proceedings, reporters camped outside the courtroom described the mood as stunned disbelief. Even journalists hardened by years of royal coverage struggled to articulate what they had just heard. "This is extraordinary," one said in a live report. "We've gone from questions about Meghan's treatment by the press and the royals to hearing her own voice, discussing how and when to bury them if they didn't meet her demands." Another added, "This isn't just a legal case now. This is history. And we're watching it unfold in real time." In the days that followed the introduction of the evidence, commentators around the world began to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about Meghan Markle's tenure as a royal. Was the narrative of victimhood exaggerated or manipulated? Were her claims about palace hostility and racism a distraction from her own machinations? What did this mean for Harry, for their children, for the monarchy itself? The ripple effects of the evidence presentation were immediate and far-reaching. Sponsors began to distance themselves. Netflix and Spotify reportedly put ongoing projects on hold pending review of developments. Invitations to high-profile events were quietly withdrawn. Friends who had once leapt to Meghan's defense declined to comment publicly. But the most immediate and devastating effect was in the courtroom itself. The jury now had before them a clear, undeniable record of communications that, at minimum, suggested deliberate attempts to threaten and intimidate the royal family for financial gain. The question was no longer whether Meghan's words could be interpreted as emotional venting. The question now was how the defense could possibly counter such direct and damning proof. And so the world waited, breathlessly, uneasily, as the trial moved into its next phase. In the next chapter, we will explore how the royal family reacted behind closed doors, the secret meetings, the internal debates, and the deeply personal fallout as they confronted the horrifying reality that one of their own had turned against them. The revelation of Meghan's blackmail plot didn't just shock the world. It shook the very foundation of Buckingham Palace. The British monarchy had weathered scandals before, divorces, infidelity, abdications, but nothing quite like this. The royal institution prides itself on stoicism, resilience, and privacy. Now, its innermost workings had been thrust into a harsh spotlight, forcing even the most discreet royals into frantic damage control behind closed doors. At first, the reaction was stunned silence. Senior advisors, seasoned courtiers, and even the most unflappable members of the royal family found themselves momentarily paralyzed. The idea that a member of their own household had been orchestrating a calculated and sinister attempt to exploit them financially was difficult to absorb. Reports leaked quietly from palace insiders suggested that King Charles, now the monarch burdened with handling this unprecedented scandal, responded with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. Charles, long characterized as reserved and introspective, reportedly listened to the tapes provided by Thomas Markle privately in his study at Buckingham Palace. He sat silently, taking it all in, his face etched with deep concern. Charles was said to be personally wounded, less by the details themselves than by the profound betrayal they represented. He had welcomed Meghan warmly into the family, walked her down the aisle when her own father was unable, and had often spoken kindly of her publicly. He struggled to reconcile the smiling, gracious young woman he once supported with the calculating strategist whose voice echoed coldly through the recordings. After the initial shock, palace advisors sprang into action. A crisis team was assembled, tasked specifically with managing the fallout. Meetings were discreet but urgent, conducted behind firmly closed doors in Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace. A sense of siege set in. Each royal aide, from private secretaries to senior communications directors, was summoned. Information was tightly controlled. Even the palace's most trusted officials were thoroughly vetted for leaks. Prince William's reaction was described by palace insiders as one of controlled fury. Having long harbored private reservations about Meghan's influence over his brother, William felt vindicated yet deeply distressed. Sources close to the future king revealed that he viewed the scandal not only as a personal betrayal, but as a profound threat to the monarchy's reputation. William had always been fiercely protective of his family's legacy, and now it was being tarnished in the worst possible way. William's first concern, reportedly, was Harry. Their relationship, already strained to near breaking point, faced its greatest test yet. How would Harry cope with the crushing truth about his wife's actions? Would he finally see Meghan as the palace saw her, as a manipulator and a threat, or would he cling even more fiercely to their bond, viewing her as a victim of palace intrigue and betrayal? Aides to William indicated that private conversations between the brothers were tense and emotional. William allegedly urged Harry to distance himself publicly from Meghan, if only for the sake of salvaging some dignity. Harry, however, remained conflicted and defensive, caught between loyalty to his family and commitment to his wife and children. The brothers' discussions ended without resolution, only deepening the sense of family fracture. Princess Catherine reportedly offered support to William, quietly taking on a more visible public role in an attempt to reassure the nation. Sources close to the Princess of Wales described her as heartbroken by the crisis. Catherine had initially welcomed Meghan warmly into the family, hopeful that she had found a confidant and partner in royal duty. Now, the betrayal felt deeply personal. In private, Catherine was said to have expressed concern for the long-term impact on the next generation, on Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. She worried how this scandal, unlike anything seen in modern royal history, would shape their future roles, their public perception, and their mental health. Meanwhile, the palace grappled with another pressing issue: public trust. The monarchy exists through consent and goodwill. This scandal posed an existential threat, calling into question not just Meghan's actions, but the judgment of the entire royal household. Questions arose internally. How had they missed the signs? Had they underestimated Meghan's ambitions, ignored red flags because they wished to appear inclusive and supportive? Had political correctness and fear of media backlash blinded them to the stark realities unfolding under their noses? Internal reviews were discreetly ordered. Senior aides tasked with overseeing the Sussex household were quietly removed or reassigned. Privately, some within the palace admitted guilt, not of complicity but of negligence. They had seen troubling behavior but dismissed it as personality clashes or media exaggeration. The tapes and messages now made clear just how gravely they had misjudged the situation. At Balmoral, Queen Camilla, known for her pragmatic and straightforward manner, provided emotional support to Charles while encouraging swift, decisive action. Camilla had endured her own share of public scandal decades earlier, but nothing compared to this. She was pragmatic, encouraging her husband to assert control over the narrative swiftly, even if painful decisions were necessary. Camilla reportedly told a confidant, "The monarchy can survive almost anything, except indecision." Privately, Harry's withdrawal from public appearances and refusal to openly condemn Meghan's actions added complexity to palace strategy. Harry's silence allowed speculation and rumor to flourish, further muddying the waters. Palace strategists, fearful of alienating Harry permanently, carefully navigated the dilemma of how to condemn Meghan without publicly isolating Harry further. Despite their anger and sense of betrayal, palace advisors counseled against harsh public statements or reactions. The family must rise above, they argued, maintaining dignity and restraint even in the face of betrayal. It was a strategy designed to reinforce the royal institution's reputation for resilience, but privately, it exacted a heavy emotional toll. The jury now had before them a clear, undeniable record of communications that, at minimum, suggested deliberate attempts to threaten and intimidate the royal family for financial gain. The question was no longer whether Meghan's words could be interpreted as emotional venting. The question now was how the defense could possibly counter such direct and damning proof. And so the world waited, breathlessly, uneasily, as the trial moved into its next phase. In the next chapter, we will explore how the royal family reacted behind closed doors, the secret meetings, the internal debates, and the deeply personal fallout as they confronted the horrifying reality that one of their own had turned against them. The revelation of Meghan's blackmail plot didn't just shock the world, it shook the very foundation of Buckingham Palace. The British monarchy had weathered scandals before, divorces, infidelity, abdications, but nothing quite like this. The royal institution prides itself on stoicism, resilience, and privacy. Now, its innermost workings had been thrust into a harsh spotlight, forcing even the most discreet royals into frantic damage control behind closed doors. At first, the reaction was stunned silence. Senior advisors, seasoned courtiers, and even the most unflappable members of the royal family found themselves momentarily paralyzed. The idea that a member of their own household had been orchestrating a calculated and sinister attempt to exploit them financially was difficult to absorb. Reports leaked quietly from palace insiders suggested that King Charles, now the monarch burdened with handling this unprecedented scandal, responded with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. Charles, long characterized as reserved and introspective, reportedly listened to the tapes provided by Thomas Markle privately in his study at Buckingham Palace. He sat silently, taking it all in, his face etched with deep concern. Charles was said to be personally wounded, less by the details themselves than by the profound betrayal they represented. He had welcomed Meghan warmly into the family, walked her down the aisle when her own father was unable, and had often spoken kindly of her publicly. He struggled to reconcile the smiling, gracious young woman he once supported with the calculating strategist whose voice echoed coldly through the recordings. After the initial shock, palace advisors sprang into action. A crisis team was assembled, tasked specifically with managing the fallout. Meetings were discreet but urgent, conducted behind firmly closed doors in Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace. A sense of siege set in. Each royal aide, from private secretaries to senior communications directors, was summoned. Information was tightly controlled. Even the palace's most trusted officials were thoroughly vetted for leaks. Prince William's reaction was described by palace insiders as one of controlled fury. Having long harbored private reservations about Meghan's influence over his brother, William felt vindicated yet deeply distressed. Sources close to the future king revealed that he viewed the scandal not only as a personal betrayal, but as a profound threat to the monarchy's reputation. William had always been fiercely protective of his family's legacy, and now it was being tarnished in the worst possible way. William's first concern, reportedly, was Harry. Their relationship, already strained to near breaking point, faced its greatest test yet. How would Harry cope with the crushing truth about his wife's actions? Would he finally see Meghan as the palace saw her, as a manipulator and a threat, or would he cling even more fiercely to their bond, viewing her as a victim of palace intrigue and betrayal? Aides to William indicated that private conversations between the brothers were tense and emotional. William allegedly urged Harry to distance himself publicly from Meghan, if only for the sake of salvaging some dignity. Harry, however, remained conflicted and defensive, caught between loyalty to his family and commitment to his wife and children. The brothers' discussions ended without resolution, only deepening the sense of family fracture. Princess Catherine reportedly offered support to William, quietly taking on a more visible public role in an attempt to reassure the nation. Sources close to the Princess of Wales described her as heartbroken by the crisis. Catherine had initially welcomed Meghan warmly into the family, hopeful that she had found a confidant and partner in royal duty. Now, the betrayal felt deeply personal. In private, Catherine was said to have expressed concern for the long-term impact on the next generation, on Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. She worried how this scandal, unlike anything seen in modern royal history, would shape their future roles, their public perception, and their mental health. Meanwhile, the palace grappled with another pressing issue: public trust. The monarchy exists through consent and goodwill. This scandal posed an existential threat, calling into question not just Meghan's actions but the judgment of the entire royal household. Questions arose internally. How had they missed the signs? Had they underestimated Meghan's ambitions, ignored red flags because they wished to appear inclusive and supportive? Had political correctness and fear of media backlash blinded them to the stark realities unfolding under their noses? Internal reviews were discreetly ordered. Senior aides tasked with overseeing the Sussex household were quietly removed or reassigned. Privately, some within the palace admitted guilt, not of complicity but of negligence. They had seen troubling behavior but dismissed it as personality clashes or media exaggeration. The tapes and messages now made clear just how gravely they had misjudged the situation. At Balmoral, Queen Camilla, known for her pragmatic and straightforward manner, provided emotional support to Charles while encouraging swift, decisive action. Camilla had endured her own share of public scandal decades earlier, but nothing compared to this. She was pragmatic, encouraging her husband to assert control over the narrative swiftly, even if painful decisions were necessary. Camilla reportedly told a confidant, "The monarchy can survive almost anything, except indecision." Privately, Harry's withdrawal from public appearances and refusal to openly condemn Meghan's actions added complexity to palace strategy. Harry's silence allowed speculation and rumor to flourish, further muddying the waters. Palace strategists, fearful of alienating Harry permanently, carefully navigated the dilemma of how to condemn Meghan without publicly isolating Harry further. Despite their anger and sense of betrayal, palace advisors counseled against harsh public statements or reactions. The family must rise above, they argued, maintaining dignity and restraint even in the face of betrayal. It was a strategy designed to reinforce the royal institution's reputation for resilience, but privately, it exacted a heavy emotional toll. Across royal residences, the younger royals privately struggled to reconcile Meghan's public image with the shocking revelations. Princess Eugenie, once publicly supportive of Meghan, reportedly expressed sadness and confusion to friends. Zara Tindall, typically stoic and uninvolved publicly, expressed frustration over how Meghan's actions had compromised the privacy and security of the entire family. At Sandringham, Princess Anne, never shy in expressing opinions, was said to have been blunt in her assessment. She reportedly insisted during private family discussions that Meghan's actions were not just a betrayal, but a criminal act requiring severe consequences. And, ever protective of her mother's legacy and the institution her family represented, reportedly stated sharply, "This must never be allowed to happen again. Enough is enough." The most difficult aspect of the crisis was navigating relationships within the family itself. Harry's refusal to sever ties or publicly denounce Meghan deeply troubled senior royals. Privately, they worried that his loyalty, though understandable, could further damage the monarchy. Conversations reportedly took place behind closed doors about whether Harry himself could remain publicly associated with the royal family, or if a deeper separation would become inevitable. Charles reportedly struggled with this decision, torn between duty to his country and love for his youngest son. He held private meetings with Harry, seeking a resolution, pleading for clarity, offering support if Harry would publicly distance himself from Meghan's alleged actions. Harry, however, remained deeply conflicted, neither condemning Meghan outright nor fully defending her actions, an ambiguity that frustrated senior royals deeply. Ultimately, the palace's internal response was cautious yet firm. Behind closed doors, a new, stricter approach to managing senior royals was quietly adopted, ensuring tighter oversight of public statements and financial affairs. The Sussex's scandals had forced the royal family into a new era of vigilance and caution. Senior palace officials privately described Meghan's scandal as a deeply painful lesson in the perils of modern celebrity culture intersecting with traditional monarchy. They recognized that Meghan had changed the rules, forcing them to adapt quickly or risk permanent damage to the institution. Yet, amid the turmoil and uncertainty, the royal family found resilience. They knew the monarchy had survived wars, abdications, scandals, and tragedies throughout history. This crisis, although painful and personal, was simply one more challenge in their long history. Privately, they resolved to emerge stronger, wiser, and more united, even if unity meant accepting painful truths and losses within their own family. As the trial continued, the family prepared for the next stage, Meghan's courtroom defense and the verdict that would decide her future and theirs. In private, they braced themselves, knowing the worst might still be ahead. In the next chapter, we'll explore Meghan's motives, seeking to understand what drove her to such shocking actions: ambition, revenge, desperation, or something else entirely. Understanding why Meghan Markle would orchestrate such a devastating scheme is more complicated than simply labeling her a villain or victim. Motives are rarely simple. They're layered, nuanced, and often contradictory. Even those closest to Meghan struggled to fully grasp what drove her to threaten the very family she'd once pledged to serve. Was it ambition? Revenge? Financial desperation? Or was it something deeper? A complicated mix of pride, power, and control? From the very beginning of her royal journey, Meghan presented herself as a trailblazer. She was not just an actress stepping onto the royal stage, but a woman with a mission: modernize an ancient institution. But palace insiders quietly suggested another angle, one of ambition unchecked by tradition. Meghan, they claimed, saw the monarchy not simply as an institution to join, but as a platform to wield. Those who worked closely with Meghan described her ambition as intense, even ruthless. Former palace aides spoke anonymously of instances when she reacted furiously to perceived slights, particularly when denied autonomy over her public image. Behind closed doors, Meghan allegedly expressed frustration that the royal institution wanted her fame but refused to relinquish the control she demanded. To her, this was not merely about recognition. It was about respect, power, and influence. Friends and former colleagues from her Hollywood days noted Meghan's relentless drive for success. She had built her career through meticulous networking, strategic choices, and calculated risks. Entering the royal family represented the ultimate career move. But once inside, she quickly discovered the limitations of her position. Rather than being welcomed as a revolutionary force, she felt trapped by traditions she neither understood nor respected. Meghan reportedly confided in a close confidant early on that she was frustrated by the monarchy's refusal to evolve at her desired pace. She had envisioned using her role to address social issues, champion progressive causes, and redefine royal relevance. But the palace, entrenched in centuries of protocol, was resistant. Meghan saw their hesitance not as caution, but as suppression. Over time, that frustration hardened into resentment, then anger. Revenge also played a significant role, according to many who studied the scandal closely. Meghan's relationship with the British press had been turbulent from the start. She entered royal life already suspicious of the media, shaped by her experiences in Hollywood, where image manipulation was essential for survival. But the intensity of British tabloid scrutiny was something else entirely: more invasive, relentless, and often brutal. Meghan's mental health suffered significantly, and palace support seemed inadequate. Publicly humiliated and privately isolated, Meghan began to nurse grudges not only against the press, but also against the royal family she believed had failed to protect her adequately. According to leaked conversations presented during the trial, Meghan spoke bitterly about the family's inaction, especially when contrasted with the swift and strong defenses mounted for other royals facing scandals. Friends testified in private depositions that Meghan's resentment grew into a conviction that the monarchy had deliberately allowed her to be targeted to distract from internal palace controversies. Meghan's critics often characterized her as manipulative, driven by financial greed. Indeed, her financial ambitions were evident. After stepping back from royal duties, Meghan and Harry quickly secured lucrative media deals worth tens of millions. Yet palace insiders claimed Meghan was never satisfied, always pushing for more influence, better terms, and greater autonomy. The royal household, increasingly alarmed by her financial demands, began tightening control, an act Meghan viewed as betrayal. Meghan reportedly saw money as more than just wealth. She viewed it as freedom. Financial independence would mean freedom from the palace's constraints, freedom from negative media narratives, and freedom to craft her own legacy. But her growing financial ambitions collided head-on with the realities of royal life, where finances are carefully managed and openly scrutinized. According to evidence presented at trial, Meghan allegedly became increasingly desperate as financial pressures mounted. Personal expenses, extravagant lifestyle demands, and ambitious business projects required significant funding. With palace resources restricted, Meghan faced tough decisions. Some speculate that her threats against the royal family were acts born from financial desperation, a last resort to maintain the lifestyle and independence she craved. Yet ambition, revenge, and financial strain alone cannot fully explain the extent of Meghan's actions. Mental health experts commenting during the trial noted that Meghan's behaviors indicated deeper psychological complexities. Dr. Elizabeth Morton, a prominent psychologist called as an expert commentator during the trial, suggested Meghan's actions could reflect a need for control rooted in deep-seated insecurities. Public humiliation, rejection by family members, relentless scrutiny. These pressures could have exacerbated an intense desire for control, manifesting in increasingly risky behaviors. Indeed, the theme of control emerged repeatedly during the trial. Meghan's communications, as presented by prosecutors, revealed a woman obsessed with managing her image, narrative, and influence. She meticulously planned media leaks, strategized financial demands, and calculated the precise timing of her threats. Psychologically, such behavior suggested someone deeply insecure beneath a carefully curated exterior. Meghan's threats, in this interpretation, represented an attempt to reclaim the control she felt slipping away. But was there another dimension entirely? A form of emotional retaliation against the monarchy for its perceived mistreatment of Harry? Friends and confidants revealed that Meghan privately expressed anger about the way Harry had been sidelined, humiliated, and treated as a secondary royal figure. Harry, once beloved by the public as the rebellious yet endearing prince, had become increasingly marginalized and criticized after marrying Meghan. Meghan, fiercely protective of her husband, reportedly resented the monarchy for how it had allowed Harry's reputation to suffer. Palace insiders speculated that part of Meghan's motivation in threatening the monarchy was to assert Harry's, and by extension, her own, value and power. "They treated us like expendable pawns," Meghan reportedly said in one message presented during the trial. "If they don't respect us, maybe fear is better than love." Yet despite these motivations, Meghan's closest supporters continued to defend her passionately. Friends from her Hollywood days and allies from humanitarian circles insisted publicly and privately that Meghan's actions had been grossly misunderstood and misrepresented. To them, she remained a compassionate woman driven by genuine ideals, caught in a relentless media storm deliberately stoked by palace insiders eager to tarnish her reputation. These supporters argued that Meghan's alleged threats were exaggerated or misinterpreted outbursts resulting from severe emotional distress. They claimed Meghan's private conversations were taken out of context and weaponized by those intent on destroying her. But the sheer weight of evidence presented during the trial undermined these claims, leaving even her most dedicated supporters struggling to reconcile their image of Meghan with the woman whose words and actions now dominated headlines worldwide. At trial, Meghan herself offered little insight into her motivations. Her legal team presented her as misunderstood, emotionally vulnerable, and unfairly targeted. Yet Meghan did not testify directly. Instead, she remained largely silent, leaving the public and the jury to interpret her motives from messages, recordings, and testimony presented by others. Her silence became a void into which speculation poured freely, further complicating public perceptions of her character. Ultimately, Meghan's motivations were likely multifaceted, a complex interplay of ambition, revenge, financial pressures, psychological distress, pride, and protectiveness. Each element alone might not have driven her to such extremes. But combined, these factors created a volatile mix, fueling decisions that ultimately led to her undoing. Palace advisors, in private conversations, lamented how badly they had misread Meghan's intentions from the start. They had viewed her ambition positively at first, as a force for modernization and relevance. But they underestimated her willingness to challenge and disrupt, and they failed to anticipate the depth of her anger and frustration when things didn't go her way. Meghan's downfall, they privately acknowledged, was also partly their own failure. Failure to understand, support, and perhaps most critically, to contain her ambitions within the strict confines of royal tradition. Yet understanding Meghan's motivations provided little comfort to those caught in the aftermath of her actions. For Harry, the monarchy, and the public, the damage was profound. Even those who tried to sympathize with Meghan's motives could not ignore the devastating consequences of her choices. The damage extended beyond his marriage. Harry's relationship with his family, already strained, deteriorated sharply. Prince William, long protective of Harry, had privately pleaded with him to distance himself from Meghan, if only for the sake of his own mental health and reputation. William's advice, though well-intentioned, was interpreted by Harry as condescending, even hostile. Conversations reportedly grew increasingly heated, culminating in a painful silence between the brothers. Charles's attempts at reconciliation fared no better. The king, burdened by the weight of his crown and deeply wounded by Meghan's betrayal, struggled to communicate with his son. Their interactions, though sincere, were marked by awkward silences and unspoken resentments. Harry felt Charles had abandoned him long before the scandal broke, failing to protect him and Meghan from intense media scrutiny. Charles, for his part, privately expressed frustration and sorrow that his youngest son seemed unwilling or unable to see the reality before him. Harry's deep sense of isolation grew exponentially as the scandal escalated. Unable to trust his family, alienated from lifelong friends, and now suspicious even of Meghan, Harry found himself trapped in emotional solitude. Mental health experts speculated publicly, from a respectful distance, that Harry was likely experiencing intense emotional turmoil, betrayal trauma compounded by feelings of guilt, embarrassment, and grief. In private, Harry sought refuge in counseling. Close friends revealed that Harry's therapy sessions became increasingly frequent, desperate attempts to find clarity amidst chaos. Even Meghan's strongest defenders acknowledged privately that Harry's pain was profound, perhaps irreparable. "This is someone who's lost faith in everyone," one anonymous insider noted. His entire support structure collapsed overnight. Yet despite this turmoil, Harry continued to struggle with public perceptions of loyalty. His silence during the trial infuriated palace officials and baffled royal watchers. Many expected Harry to publicly denounce Meghan's actions, distancing himself to salvage his own reputation. Instead, Harry remained silent, an act interpreted variously as misplaced loyalty, fear of confrontation, or sheer paralysis. For palace insiders, Harry's silence felt like complicity, deepening their frustration and anger. Harry's motivations, however, were more complex. Those closest to him insisted Harry's silence wasn't endorsement or complicity, but deep emotional paralysis. Harry, they claimed, remained fiercely protective of Meghan, not just out of love, but from a sense of obligation. After all, he had publicly vowed to protect Meghan from the media, the palace, and anyone who threatened her. How could he now abandon that promise, especially when she needed support most? Harry's sense of duty intensified because of their children. He worried deeply about Archie and Lilibet's future, acutely aware that this scandal would haunt their lives indefinitely. For Harry, shielding his children meant, in part, protecting Meghan, even at great personal cost. Yet this stance further alienated him from his family, who saw Harry's continued association with Meghan as damaging to the monarchy and his own well-being. Harry's closest friends privately expressed deep concern. Childhood companions, military colleagues, and former palace aides watched helplessly as Harry withdrew further into solitude. Efforts to intervene, private visits, discreet phone calls, met resistance or avoidance. Many described a sense of powerlessness, observing their friends' emotional deterioration from afar. Privately, Harry expressed despair. According to confidential conversations revealed by friends, Harry frequently questioned his decisions. Had he failed Meghan by not intervening sooner? Had he been too trusting or naive? Or had he failed his family by allowing tensions to escalate unchecked? This internal dialogue exacerbated Harry's emotional torment, fueling endless self-blame. Perhaps most devastating was Harry's reported confrontation with Meghan herself. Sources described tense private conversations between the couple, marked by tears, accusations, and painful honesty. Harry, reportedly, demanded explanations from Meghan, why she had risked everything, why she had betrayed him. Meghan's responses, according to friends who spoke discreetly to the press, oscillated between defensiveness and vulnerability, deepening Harry's confusion. Despite everything, Harry refused to publicly abandon Meghan, a choice viewed as both admirable and tragic. Public opinion polls revealed mixed feelings about Harry's loyalty. Some saw his silence as proof of honorable devotion. Others viewed it as weakness or even cowardice. Social media debates became fiercely polarized, with hashtags like #HarryStandByMeghan trending alongside #FreePrinceHarry, reflecting the public's conflicted perceptions. Meanwhile, palace officials grappled privately with their approach to Harry. Advisors debated fiercely behind closed doors. Should they continue efforts to salvage Harry's royal image, or accept that he might be permanently compromised by his association with Meghan's scandal? Some argued passionately for compassion, urging patience and continued outreach. Others insisted on swift, decisive action, publicly distancing the royal family from both Harry and Meghan to protect institutional integrity. For Harry, each new revelation in the trial brought fresh pain. The recordings of Meghan's voice threatening the family Harry once deeply loved were particularly excruciating. Close friends revealed Harry was devastated hearing Meghan's calculated, cold words about the family he still considered his own, despite tensions and disagreements. Privately, Harry expressed shame and embarrassment, feelings amplified by global media coverage dissecting his marriage, his loyalty, and his personal judgment. This exposure left Harry deeply vulnerable, stripped of privacy, dignity, and agency over his own narrative. He reportedly felt humiliated not just by Meghan's actions, but by his inability to foresee or prevent them. Friends also expressed concern about Harry's future mental health. Military colleagues privately described Harry's struggles as deeply troubling, noting parallels with his past experiences of trauma and loss. His mother Diana's death, his difficult adolescence, his previous struggles with anxiety and depression. Harry's inner circle feared this scandal might trigger a profound mental health crisis, urging continued support and vigilance. At the heart of Harry's private crisis lay profound grief, a sense of loss not just of trust or reputation, but of identity itself. Harry had defined himself publicly as a protector, first of his brother William, later of his wife and children. Now, that identity was shattered, leaving Harry uncertain of who he was or where he belonged. As the trial approached its conclusion, Harry's inner turmoil only intensified. Privately, he braced himself for the verdict, knowing that whatever happened, his life and his children's lives would never be the same. The possibility of Meghan facing severe legal consequences terrified him, yet the alternative, a public perception that justice had failed, was equally distressing. Harry's private crisis became emblematic of the human cost behind sensational scandals. It wasn't just about palace intrigue or tabloid headlines. It was about real emotional devastation, shattered families, and lives forever altered. Harry's anguish reminded the public that behind every sensational headline, there was a human being enduring profound suffering. In the next chapter, we turn our attention to the courtroom itself, the dramatic climax of Meghan's trial, the shocking testimonies, and the critical moments that led to her final sentencing, changing royal history forever. The world's eyes were fixated on London's Old Bailey courthouse as Meghan Markle's trial reached its dramatic climax. Inside the stately courtroom, beneath the towering ceilings and ornate wood panels, tension crackled palpably. For weeks, the public had dissected every detail, scrutinized every witness, and absorbed every revelation. Now, the stage was set for the most pivotal moment yet. Testimonies so explosive they threatened to rewrite royal history permanently. From the moment Meghan entered the courtroom on the decisive day, observers noted her carefully cultivated composure. Dressed conservatively, her face was a mask of solemn dignity, betraying none of the inner turmoil she must have felt. Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every subtle movement, every quiet glance. Meghan sat calmly beside her legal team,